By 1990, Dad's decline into dementia was progressing visibly and inexorably to those who were paying attention. He really was getting a lot worse, befuddled, confused. He was starting to walk with a forward hunched kind of stance where he'd walk very haltingly down the road, and if you grabbed his elbow when you were going on a walk together up and down our street, we'd go for short walks, I'd hold him by the elbow, and his elbow was all tensed up, the muscle in his elbow, and he was all tensed. He didn't seem to be able to relax his muscles or his mind, what was left of it. If you massaged his neck, it was like bands of steel. It was rigid, unyielding. I wasn't in great shape myself that spring of 1990 when I moved up to Ithaca from New York City. I'd been out of the country for a year and a half. I'd come back in December at the end of 1989 and was a wreck as a result of a disastrous love affair in Costa Rica. I was just a shell. I was in terrible shape. It did me good to take care of someone. By taking care of him, to some extent, I was taking care of myself, giving myself time to recuperate. I was 40 at that point. Dad was approaching 80. My mother needed help in taking care of him. It was too much for her alone to shoulder the whole project of taking care of him. And to be perfectly frank, she was not the most nurturing person or the best caregiver, the most yielding and loving person who wouldn't take offense when he didn't understand things. She would raise her voice and rail at him, and also she would ignore him. I knew it was time to convince them to move into a place where he, and in turn she, eventually could be taken care of. They put up great resistance to this, especially my mother. It's a familiar story. So many people are dealing with these kinds of situations, taking care of aged parents. The rest of my family was scattered around on the East Coast. My sister in Pennsylvania was preoccupied with her own problems. My one brother was in Maryland, and as became apparent, he was drinking and smoking himself to a very slow suicide. My brother Ted, who had once been a spy for the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. My other brother Bill was living in North Carolina with his extended family. His daughter and son lived nearby. They were the healthiest of our whole crowd, the happiest, had the best life. And yet, they were far away. I would describe to them, to Bill and his wife Keita, the ongoing situation with my father and my mother. I would unburden myself on the phone to them. Keita had worked with older people for many years. She was the one in the family who actually was the most understanding of Dad's problem. The others were in varying stages of denial, as I had been myself up until 1990. Then it was very clear to me that he was not entirely gone, but going fast. And he needed not just an advocate, as they say in jargon, for taking care of a parent or any patient, but a protector. If I would say this to people, that my father had needed a protector from his wife, I could see the skepticism in their eyes, and they'd say, oh, come on, it couldn't have been that bad. And I'd say, well, let me tell you about the time he fell. Now, he fell several times. Everybody does. It's the downfall of many old people, the beginning of the long, slippery slope towards death, a broken hip, all these sorts of situations. But one time, it was in the afternoon, my mother was back in the bedroom. I was in the living room and didn't see it happen, but I heard it first, this terrific thump as he fell. There was a strip of tile, linoleum tile, but that was what they had been able to afford when they built the house, not real tile. Facsimile tile in 9-inch squares that he had put down himself. He had put down the adhesive in very neat, clear rows. It had a kind of a pattern I can still remember, with pale flecked tile and then darker ones on the corners, every maybe 5 tiles or so, and one in the middle was darker. The trim area along one side of the stairwell was where he fell, at one corner. I remember precisely where that was. I found him there on his back on the floor, looking dazed. And I said, oh, Dad, did you hit your head? And he couldn't express it, but he reached back. He was reaching back. I found him a pillow, the closest pillow I found, I put under his head. My mother came out. She had heard the ruckus. She came out, and the first thing she did, she saw that the pillow I had gotten to put under his head was too fancy a pillow, so she had gone back to the bedroom and gotten an old scroungy pillow because he was bleeding from his head, now we saw. And I said, oh, Dad, we got to get you to a doctor. You really banged your head. Mom said, oh, it'll be all right. He'll be fine. She was not only a little gruff sometimes, but she was cheap, always cheap. It just was her identity. As Ted liked to say, saving money wasn't something Mom did to get to some other objective. Saving money was who she was. It was what she did. She saved. She couldn't help herself. She was a child of the Depression. It was true. She had been a missionary wife in India, and they had had to scrimp there. They had had servants, but they had not made much in the way of income, even though Dad had run the Agricultural Institute of Allahabad. But she had scrimped and saved all her life, and she wasn't about to stop now. When she was 77, if he was 79, so she got this other pillow stuck under his head. And she said, oh, it's a little blood, but it'll be all right. It'll stop soon. I parted his hair and looked at the back of his head, and there was a deep gash in the back of his head. It was at least 1/2 inch deep, it seemed. We're taking him to the doctor, I said. We're going to Dryden. We're going to see Dr. Ferger. That was our old family friend, family doctor. He had been in India as a youth himself, John Ferger. His father, Henry Ferger, had taken photos of many of us when we'd been infants, toddlers. There was a picture of me that Henry Ferger, the doctor's father, out in India, had taken when I was maybe 2, 3 years old. A big enlargement of a black and white photo that he had colorized in that old style. He put a little lipstick on me, a toddler, and a little rouge on my cheeks of the photo. John Ferger was a very kind man. I needed an ally in this. And I said, no, Mom, we're taking him to the doctor right now. And I bundled Dad into the car. He was still very baffled by all this that was going on. Who can tell how he felt? He was stunned from this fall. He had fallen backwards, and that's a terrible feeling to have, to lose your balance and go over backwards. Much worse than falling forward, where you can shield yourself a little bit. We got him to Dr. Ferger's office. He said, well, you were right to bring him in here. This is a serious cut. He cut away the hair and the surrounding area and iodine around the cut, and he stitched it up. It took 4 or 5 stitches. Mom sat there mutely, thinking her thoughts, and we took Dad back to Ithaca. Mom liked to play the evening news on the TV while we ate supper. I once suggested to her, couldn't we have quiet while we eat? Maybe we could talk to each other. She said, I want to hear the news. I'd like to hear something interesting. So that was the end of that idea. And Wheel of Fortune, of course. Now, Dad was beyond being interested in Wheel of Fortune, but Mom seemed to find it interesting. There were a few things I could do for him. I could tell that his ankles and his lower legs itched a great deal. So I would put lotion on his ankles. I'd rub into his lower legs. But again, all they had in the way of lotion was 4 or 5 bottles of squeezed out, old petrified kind of remnants of lotion, discolored. There was nothing really left in them, and she wasn't about to buy more. She seemed to think maybe this lotion that we had, these little bits here and there, if you really squeezed or dropped in some warm water, sloshed it around, maybe that would see us through? Who knows? I didn't ask. But I did go out and buy lotion and rub it into his ankles, his shanks. That seemed to help some. We'd sit there in the living room, just the two of us, Dad and I, and listen to an Yves Montand song, maybe our favorite, that one about the neighborhoods in Paris. Paris dans chaque faubourg, le soleil de chaque journée fait en quelque destinée à éclore un rêve d'amour. Parmi la foule, un amour se pose. Like that, with its sweet accordion accompaniment in the background. We didn't have to look at each other to enjoy it together. Yves Montand's beautiful, soft voice, very atmospheric. Dad had, during the middle portion of his life, rather fancied himself as a Francophile type American. He looked French. He wore a beret at one point when hardly anyone was wearing berets in this country, and it suited him. He smoked a pipe. A short, stocky man, he could easily have been a Parisian, the way he looked. A man of deep philosophy and wonderment about life, an appreciator of aesthetics and of the slowly flowing Seine River and lovely bridges. I always wanted to spend more time with him in Paris. I think the only time he and I were in Paris together was in 1960, when I was 11. And he was, 50 years old. But he looked the part then. I always yearned for a revisit when maybe just the two of us could walk the streets together in a sort of pensive sharing of the atmosphere, the way we listened to those Yves Montand songs. Occasionally during that year I spent there in Ithaca, my mother would go away for a weekend and I'd be left with Dad, and we could loosen up the rules a little bit. She had determined that alcohol was bad for him, which I'm sure was the fact, for his loss of memory and dementia. It made it worse if he drank, so she didn't allow any drinking. It also cost pennies. If she went away for a couple of days, I would get out the wine bottle that she'd hidden someplace and pour out a little red wine for Dad and a little for myself. At the supermarket, I'd buy a steak and some mushrooms. I'd fry up the mushrooms, saute them, and fry up the steak in the frying pan, which had been his technique of making one of his favorite meals when he had been off working in New York City, when he had lived pretty much by himself in New York during the week and then had come home to Ithaca on Mohawk Airlines for weekends. I knew it was something he liked, and I thought it might be evocative for him. So if she went away, that was the sort of thing we would do. I don't think he particularly yearned for a drink at that point, but he liked the idea of it. We'd sit there, enjoy each other's company, eat our steak and mushrooms and potatoes, and eat a salad. After we ate, it was in the summer by now, we would go for a walk out on the street. Now, in the old days, they had walked up and down the length of North Sunset Drive, which is a long street. It was maybe half a mile, 3/4 of a mile long, traversing the hillside. And the houses, some of them, could look down toward Cayuga Lake in the distance. Our house had such a view. We had gone for these long walks when I had come back to visit from my cab driving days in New York City in the 80s. He would have been in better shape then, and he and my mother and I would go down to the end of North Sunset Drive and back. Now he was reduced to the state of walking just a few hundred feet in one direction or the other, and as I say, his elbow in my hand would be very tensed, and he would walk with this forward juddering motion where he seemed about to fall forward on his face on the pavement. I would try to steady him. He never did fall, but I had the feeling always that he looked like he was just about to fall forwards. So he wouldn't go very far. And this one time, Mom had gone off to Chautauqua. That was in another corner of New York State that had stimulating intellectual programs and lots of American flags on these clapboard house front porches, insulated from real life, but it was beautiful. There was a lake there. There were concerts, presentations of stalwart liberal Americans that Mom could enjoy. And she needed the vacation. I think it was only a long weekend. So Dad and I were bachelors together and ate our steak, took it easy, went for this walk together along the street. We hadn't gone far. We'd gone about 2 houses worth down the street. 100, 200, 300 feet. We stopped. I said, "Are you tired, Dad? Would you like to turn back now?" He said, "I think so, yes." And he said, "You know, I know I'm a burden on you and Alice Wynne. I know I'm a lot to take care of. And I think I've had enough. I don't want to go on anymore. Would you help me? Would you help me end this?" I held his elbow. I looked at him. I didn't say no. I didn't say anything. I hope by my expression I showed sympathy, because that's what I was feeling. But I was stunned, and I didn't know what to say. I wish I had spoken. It wasn't a lack of nerve exactly, because I believed I knew what he felt, and I agreed with him. I didn't disagree with anything he had said. He was a burden to us. Of course he was. To deny that energetically would be to patronize him and to minimize his suffering. He knew how he was. He knew we loved him, but he knew he was a burden. And I wasn't going to disagree with that just to be nice and to follow the textbook, because I didn't feel that was fair. We walked back to the house. I was wondering how I could help him. It was just the two of us there in the house. She was gone far away for a good period of time. I had the feeling that he had felt free to unburden himself to me because it was just the two of us and because she was gone from our environs there. He felt a psychological freedom, I think, to speak because she wasn't around. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no. I helped him take off his things and put on his pajamas. I made sure he took his pills. At one consultation a year or two earlier, Dr. Ferger had said when I asked, yes, if Dad had not had his thyroid medication, which he had started taking about the time he was 75, he probably wouldn't have still been alive. And from the way he said it, he was answering my unasked question. Is this fair? We extend some old dodderer's life through medicating something else. Of course, we have his best interests in heart, but maybe we live too long. He hadn't been in the room when I was asking those questions. He had lived a long, vigorous, very productive life. He had helped millions of people in the underdeveloped world, as we Americans like to say. Millions upon millions of people. He was a great man, my father. But no more. He had been a great man. And he knew the difference. I didn't want to patronize him. We slept. The next day, Mom still wasn't back. Dad said, and it was interesting because he went in and out of moments of lucidity. He'd been lucid when he had made his request the evening before. Slow speaking, halting, but lucid. He knew what he wanted. He knew what was fair. And he was lucid at this conversation the next day when he said, you remember what we talked about last night? I said, yes, I remember. Of course I do. He said, well, I've changed my mind. I don't think I should do that after all. We shouldn't do it. Alice Wynne would feel too guilty. He didn't want to do it because it would have made my mother feel bad. I wasn't sure that was true entirely, but I didn't try to talk him out of not ending his life. I would have been willing to help him. And later on, when I realized the anguish that only increased in the next 2 years before he did die in North Carolina in 1992, I wished often that I had been a little more supportive when he first asked. A lot more supportive. But it's a lot to take on all of a sudden, a question like that. I wasn't the ever ready mind I would have liked to have been. I put him to bed. I told him I loved him. I kissed him on the forehead. We're not a kissing family. I said, I love you, old man. I love you, old man. And I put him to sleep. We had the family car. We had the family garage that he had built. We had the means. I just lacked the will. And I'm still sorry. But that was many years ago. And now I'm getting to be an old man. And I'm wondering how to deal with dementia when it comes to me, if it does. I've thought, well, here's one thing I could do. I've been spending all this time making all these videos of stories of my life, my father's life, my grandfather's life. Maybe when my mind drifts away from me, I can sit and watch these videos and wonder who that man is on the screen there, talking to me, telling me about his life in rhythms that seem uncannily familiar. Dad used to say to Mom, "Who's that nice young man who's been helping us?"
À Paris, dans chaque faubourg, le soleil de chaque journée fait en quelque destinée éclore un rêve d'amour. Parmi la foule, un amour se pose sur une âme de 20 ans. Pour elle, tout se métamorphose, tout est couleur. De printemps à Paris, quand le jour se lève, à Paris, dans chaque faubourg, à 20 ans, on fait des rêves. Tout est couleur d'amour.